Wow, stories.
Hi, Reddit. Boy, do I have some twisted tea for you. Buckle up. It's a long one. I, 31-year-old female, began dating Frank, 30-year-old male, about 1 year ago. We texted for a few weeks after we matched, met up, and we've been inseparable since. He is sensitive, respectful, and loving to everyone in his life, and I absolutely adore him. Whenever we have disagreements, we sit down and calmly talk it out. We have great communication and work hard to meet each other's needs. Frank has beautiful, healthy relationships with a circle of friends, and it's been a pleasure to integrate into the group. Frank is also very close with his brother Daniel, 28-year-old male. They talk on Discord regularly and share a lot of very specific interests. Due to the pandemic, they both moved back in with their parents, about 2 hours away from any major city. When I invited Frank to come stay with me at my apartment in the city, Daniel expressed that he wanted to live with us. At that point, Frank and I weren't ready to sign a lease together, and I didn't know Daniel, so I said no. Daniel asked Frank again, but we stood firm in our decision. Frank, Daniel, and I would chat on Discord occasionally while we played video games online together. I sensed that Daniel was not happy that his brother moved out, so I frequently encouraged Frank to do things with Daniel, and I played games with them I wasn't super into. I started to notice some odd behavior with how Daniel treated me in the game. The game is kind of like Minecraft, where you spend hours gathering resources to make one item. We would farm all night, and then Daniel would ask me to make him an expensive item with all the resources I had just gathered. He also asked me to illustrate his character in full color with shading for no compensation. The description was intimacy and weird, but I followed the framework, save for that part. It took about 20 hours, and I did it because I wanted us to get along. It was a little frustrating, but not a big deal considering how important Daniel is to Frank. Then it got weird. We were playing the game as usual when Daniel started talking about intimacy. He started talking about his kinks, and then asked Frank and I if he could be our unicorn, as in the third intimacy partner to a threesome, with his brother, but as a /joke/. I was taken aback but just shoved the discomfort down and wrote it off as a misunderstanding on my part. Since then, he's frequently used language to insinuate us all being intimacy together. Things like OP and I are your little sluts to Frank in a group chat. I can't tell you how many times I pretended this wasn't happening. I never felt like he was interested in me, or that it was about me at all. I started to wonder if he had some sort of fixation on his brother. A couple of months ago, Frank and I started looking for a bigger place for the two of us. Daniel asked again if he could move in with us, and again, not taking no, and repeatedly asked. I thought Daniel just had poor boundaries in his attachment to Frank. Daniel doesn't seem to have a lot of friends, and my heart goes out to him. So anyway, Frank and I find a beautiful little place, and Daniel immediately asks if he can have his name on one of the utility bills so he could claim residency at our place. He said he wanted to see a doctor, and he needed to live within the doctor's zip code to be able to see him. I want to give him the benefit of the doubt, but I've been sick all my life and just went through cancer treatment, which means lots and lots of doctors. I've never heard of anything like a specialist only seeing patients within a certain zip code, but maybe I'm wrong. Also, we don't live in a place known for great medical support. Cut to 2 weeks later, we're moved in, and Daniel, 2 hours away, asks Frank to look at an apartment for him. Frank goes to see it and remarks that it doesn't have laundry included. And Daniel responds, "Oh, that's not a problem. I'll just be doing laundry at your place." I thank whatever higher power that Frank woke up to this boundary trampling and told him no. That night, we find out Daniel hadn't even prepared to apply for the apartment. But he made Frank feel bad because he was devastated. He said he'd been planning to move out there within the next week or two, and now his plans were ruined. Frank was sad because his brother was sad, and this was the first time I clocked Daniel as being emotionally manipulative. Dude hadn't even seen the apartment, prepared his finances, or talked to the landlord of the place Frank checked out. Yet he was devastated it didn't work out. Now, for some backstory. Daniel is the golden child of the family. spared from the abuse Frank endured from their father. Their dad used his emotions to control Frank. And I've started to see this control in Daniel, albeit through pity rather than anger. Their mom is genuinely kind and lovely, and I can see where Frank gets that from. However, when I went with Frank to visit their family home, his mom talked about Daniel constantly. Things like Daniel's so smart, Daniel taught himself to read through video games, etc., etc. Of course, I wanted to get to know Daniel and the family, but I'm dating Frank, and I would have loved to hear more about him. It was the same when his mom came to help us move. While totally selfless and greatly appreciated, she talked about Daniel through most of our conversations. I don't think Frank is aware of the depth of this family dynamic, but he is in therapy for how his dad treated him. Back to the present. Daniel was invited to sleep over our place after we got settled in our new home. I was already uncomfortable with him at this point, not just because of the continual intimacy comments, but also because of all the weird ways he tried to claim residency with us. But Frank loves Daniel, and I didn't want to impede their relationship. I thought about spending all of Friday night Saturday out of the house, but I decided against it in favor of trying to bond with Daniel. It wasn't going to happen if I was avoiding him. So I walk into the house after work, and two of our cats are fighting, and Daniel opens the evening with a joke. LOL, it's Israel and Palestine in here. He then segues into talking about relationships. Normal. How he's bisexual, how he wants to move to another city with a thriving kink scene. 3 weeks ago, he was devastated he didn't get that apartment. Dude has been bringing up his kinks with his brother and me since I met him, talking about how he's a twink and naming characters things after kinks, etc. Not normal. We get dinner and proceed to play tabletop games together. Then it started. Daniel's board was stacked and was doing well. I was like, Daniel, how did your board get so crazy in a complimentary, hey, you're crushing this game kind of tone? Daniel responds, LOL, I was keeping everything in my ball sack. He then proceeds to talk about intimacy jokes for 3+ hours. Unprovoked, talking about intimacy nonstop. There was no other conversation. Talking about his weenie balls freaking kinks. Frank seemed out of it, super focused on the game, and I quickly dissociated as I was sexually abused by a family member as a child. Yes, I'm in therapy for the CPTSD. No one was responding to Daniel, so he kept asking Frank for validation like, hey, that was a funny joke, right? And then would say something else inappropriate. Frank continued not to respond while I kept my head down. My mind was in a perpetual loop. After Daniel would make a comment, I'd convince myself that I misheard and it wasn't a big deal. Then he would say something wild again. That night, all I could think about was Daniel doing weird shit, like jacking off on the couch and rubbing semen on things, etc. I got out of the house ASAP the next morning and stayed out until he left. I was heavily dissociated for all of Saturday. I am working through this specific issue in therapy right now, and I decided I needed to talk to Frank about how Daniel acted the night before. We sat outside that evening, and I told Frank how his brother's deluge of intimacy conversation made me uncomfortable. Frank took it surprisingly well, and affirmed that some of the things his brother said made him uncomfortable too. I brought up that he asked to be in a threesome with us, under the guise of a joke, and that he frequently talked about the three of us being intimacy together in our group text. Frank said he had no idea how to handle it and that he needed time to think. He also said he didn't notice Daniel being over-sexual when it was just the two of them, which I thought might be an implication, that he thought the issue was that Daniel was interested in me. I don't agree, but I didn't say anything at the time. A few days later, Frank told me he'd made plans with his brother later this week to talk about how that night made him feel. I wanted to address that I thought he was sexually fixated on Frank, that he brought up being bisexual and went over all his kinks at the start of our first sleepover together, that he literally asked to be in a threesome with us, that he frequently referred to himself and me as Frank's little sluts. Here's the kicker. Frank agreed, a bunch of memories came back to him, and he started to remember how inappropriate Daniel would be around him. He shared some of the memories with me. The first time he met Daniel's ex, Amanda, they wanted to talk spoilers about a show Daniel wasn't caught up on. So they asked Daniel to leave the room for 5 minutes, and when Daniel came back in, he made a joke about them making out. From how Frank framed the situation, it sounded like Amanda had received the same weird threesome shoot I've been dealing with. It's clear to me now that Daniel has an intimacy fixation on his brother, and I'm absolutely disgusted. I can't find any resources for an adult wanting to frick their sibling. I told Frank that I won't be around Daniel if he continues talking like this, but honestly, I want to go no contact now. He said a lot of other inappropriate things I did not include. I don't know what to do, Reddit. I know Frank will be understanding yet devastated if I go no contact with Daniel. His extended family, who are normal and wonderful, are frequently having events and mine is thousands of miles away. So going no contact with Daniel will be very difficult. How do I navigate this relationship going forward? Thank you for reading if you got this far. Cheers, OP Now. For a few comments before the update. Comment 1. You have tolerated entirely too much of this already. You need to have boundaries made of steel. Be firm in telling Frank that you absolutely will not tolerate any behavior of this kind. And if he doesn't shut it down immediately in real time, you will. Make a plan to move out of your current situation. Next comment, if Frank doesn't step in, I'm done with this shoot. You are perverted and disgusting. Don't ever freaking speak to me again. Frank, you can either respect my statement or we're done as well. Comment 2. While you think Daniel is the issue, in reality, you have a boyfriend problem. This is not one of those cases when the brother is making subtle passes at you. He is constantly pushing boundaries and disrespecting you, and your boyfriend just lets it happen. At this point, you need to tell your boyfriend you're going no contact with his brother, and if he doesn't support that, you need to leave. Unless, of course, you're okay with having a threesome with them. Now for the update. Hi Reddit, thanks for the comments on my last post. Things have escalated since then, and I'm still reeling from the shock of it all. After Frank and I had our talk about Daniel's behavior, Frank confronted him. It was supposed to be a heart-to-heart between brothers, but it turned into a nightmare. Daniel denied everything, saying he was just being playful and we were taking it all wrong. He even had the audacity to accuse me of trying to drive a wedge between them. Frank was torn, but he believed me over Daniel, which only made Daniel more furious. Then, out of nowhere, Daniel did something I never thought possible. He revealed that Frank had been secretly funneling money from their parents' retirement fund. He showed us bank statements, transfers, everything. My world shattered. The man I trusted, the one I thought was sensitive and respectful, had been lying to everyone, including me. I felt betrayed, but something didn't add up. Frank was devastated, not because he got caught, but because it wasn't true. We dug deeper, and the truth came out. Daniel had forged the documents. He'd been the one stealing from their parents, and when he felt cornered, he tried to pin it on Frank. The evidence was irrefutable. Frank's name was cleared, but the damage to their family was done. Their parents were heartbroken, and Daniel was disowned. The aftermath was messy. Frank's relationship with his parents was strained, even though he was innocent. They couldn't understand how such deceit had festered under their roof. I supported Frank through it all, but I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that lingered. Just when we thought we could breathe again, another bomb dropped. Frank's mom was diagnosed with a serious illness. The family rallied around her, but the tension was clear. Daniel tried to come back, to be there for his mom, but the betrayal was too fresh. He wasn't welcome. In the midst of this family crisis, Frank proposed to me. It was bittersweet. I said yes because I love him, but our joy was overshadowed by the family's pain. We postponed announcing our engagement, not wanting to add to the turmoil. And then, as if things couldn't get any worse, Daniel's true colors showed once more. He tried to sue Frank for emotional distress and defamation. It was ludicrous. The case was thrown out, but it was the final straw for me. I couldn't be part of this toxic cycle any longer. I told Frank that I needed space, that the constant drama was too much for me. Frank understood and we took a break. It was the hardest decision I've ever made, but I needed to protect my own mental health. I spent time with friends focused on work, and tried to find some semblance of normalcy. After a few weeks, Frank came to me. He'd been seeing a therapist, working through the betrayal and the chaos his brother had caused. He wanted to make things right, to build a life with me away from the drama. We decided to move forward, slowly, with our relationship. We're still together and things are looking up. Frank's mom is responding well to treatment, and the family's healing. Daniel is out of the picture, and while it's sad, it's for the best. Frank and I are planning our future one step at a time.